Ted Hall lived here from 1962 until he died in 1999. And his claim to fame is that he was the youngest physicist hired at the Los Alamos site of the Manhattan Project, which was where all the research on the atomic bomb was done. And he was hired at the age of 18 as a junior physics major at Harvard on the recommendation of John Van Fleck when Oppenheimer was desperately looking for more physicists to come and speed up the development of the bomb as they were approaching 1944, and the war was coming closer and closer to an obvious end, although they didn't know exactly when it would end. But Germany was losing, Japan was losing, and Germany was not going to get the bomb that they were worried about. So the US wanted to be able to use the bomb, they wanted to get it done before the war ended, and so he was trying to find more physicists. They had stripped the physics departments of all the top physicists in the US, and the universities were having a hard time in teaching introductory physics students because the faculty was all working for the Manhattan Project. It was like 100,000 people were working there, and there were almost 1,000 physicists at Los Alamos. So Ted got hired. He started working in 1944 in January 28th. And he was assigned to the plutonium bomb and put on the task of fine-tuning the implosion device that was required for the plutonium bomb to work. It was very complicated, difficult chemical to work with, unlike U-235, which was just hard to isolate from raw uranium because it was such a small percentage of the uranium isotope. And so the difficulty with the uranium bomb was just getting enough of the fissionable material. The problem with plutonium was it was so highly fissionable because of an impurity in it that was 1,000 times more fissionable than the main isotope, that it would heat up and melt while it was going, while two pieces were flying together at 1,000 miles per hour, which is how they did the uranium bomb, and it would melt and it would make a fizzle because the pieces couldn't come together dense enough to make it blow up. So they had to make 32 pieces crash together in a microsecond for it to work. And that was what Ted's job was. So he really understood the bomb, how it was being built and everything. And 6 months into his work, he realized, like a lot of the senior scientists, much more senior than him, did, that the Germans were not going to get the bomb because all their infrastructure was being bombed day and night by them. And a lot of them were saying, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't build this. And they also were asking the question, why isn't the Soviet Union being brought in on this since they're our major ally? They were the ones who were destroying the Wehrmacht in the Eastern Front and driving the Germans back by that point into Germany. And so, but meanwhile, they were being kept out, it was supposedly secret. In fact, the US didn't learn that there were spies in the Manhattan Project until December of 1949. They thought they'd completely kept them out. Actually, there were like 8 or 9 spies within the project. We now know, and one of them was Ted. And Ted, realizing this and hearing this trouble about how the Germans weren't going to get the bomb, and that, in fact, the target of the bomb now was not even Japan, it was Russia. He found that very disturbing because he felt that the bomb was going to be dangerous in the hands of one country, including the United States. And so he decided on his own, in discussions with his Harvard roommate named Seville Sachs, that he had to get another country that could stop the US from using the bomb after the war to control, most of the world. And his conclusion was there was only one country that could do that. It wouldn't be England, which wouldn't stop the United States from doing anything. It wouldn't be France. It wouldn't be Germany. A new peaceful Germany. Nobody could do it except for Russia. And so he decided to voluntarily find a spy and give them all the plans for how to make a plutonium bomb. And that's what he did. So I first of all, and then the interesting thing is, I was writing a piece about commemorating Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I looked up this, I tried to come up with a new angle, because I did that every 5 years or so, and you get bored writing the same thing, and you think, well, nobody wants to hear this again. So I was wondering, who were these Americans, and most of the spies were Americans, who decided to betray their country and give the bomb plans or information about the bomb to the Russians, and what was their motivation. So I looked them up, and I saw these 8 pictures in Google, and one of them was a pimply-faced kid who looked like, he was in high school, like no acne, and until his, let's see.
This is a recording for archive purposes. The idea is to document.
Yeah, here, if you look at his picture closely, I think you can see he's got a lot of acne now, and that's his ID picture at 18. So, and that's his brother, who's 11 years older. He invented the Minuteman missile. And that's J. Edgar Hoover. So I was struck by the fact that there was this kid, and it said, when I looked him up, that he'd never been caught. And I thought, geez, this is really an interesting story. I gotta look at this. And then I wrote a piece just quickly, which was deliberately controversial. I said, Ted Hall should get a posthumous Nobel Peace Prize because what he did prevented, albeit with a lot of scary close calls, the bomb ever being used again after August 9th and the dropping of the Nagasaki bomb. And that's an objective reality. I mean, the mad mutual assured destruction that resulted from both countries having the bomb did, in fact, prevent them from using the bombs, because you couldn't do it and guarantee that there wouldn't be a retaliation that you didn't want to have hit you too. So I wrote that, and I was expecting to get a lot of hate mail. I got a little bit, but then I got a message that said, "Dear Dave, I'm reading your article about Ted Hall with tears in my eyes. I'm Ted Hall's widow, and we need to talk." So I went, well, I found out she was living in Newcomers. And so when my daughter was graduating from Oxford with her doctorate, a year later, I told Joan, who I'd become a sort of an email buddy with, that we were coming to England, and she said, well, then you have to come visit me, and not for just lunch. You have to plan on spending the night, and we have a couple of days that we need to talk. So we went there, and I met her, and you'll see she's a pretty amazing woman, just from the trailer I'm going to show you, because I made a movie, a feature movie about Ted Hall's story, and did the book at the same time, and with much more detail. Let me play, before I go any further, I'm not sure I can go backwards. I might have to punch through this. Come on. Yeah, now I can go back to the end. So this one, this is the trailer for the movie.
This is a recording for archives. This in connection with his work on the atomic bomb. I left high school at 15 and went to the University of Chicago. In my third year in the place, and I met Ted. We just went around together.
Ted Hall was a man with a remarkable mind. He was a senior at Harvard at the age of 18. A recruiter from Washington came up. His mission was to pick up a few very junior physicists to help in the research work at Los Alamos.
Suddenly Ted went all serious and he said, "There's something I have to tell you."
He was working on the implosion bomb. It was one of the major secrets of the war.
We have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction.
Something gruesome and horrible was being constructed.
Knowledge should be shared. They had decided they wanted to get in touch with the Soviets. Ted had passed along the first information of this bomb that would blow up Nagasaki. This speeded up the Soviet development of the bomb by about 5 years.
He did agree to continue. That was when the hunt resumed.
The FBI started following us.
The Rosenbergs were small fish compared to Ted Hall.
The Wunderkind spy. It was very dangerous that the Americans had a monopoly of this weapon.
Did you provide information to the Soviet Union?
What should have been done with Ted Hall? Shot.
The world has come extremely close to real, actual, total disaster.
What made you do it?
I guess a major factor would be compassion.
I never got to talk to Ted because he died in 1999, and I didn't start working on this until 2018. But I did get to know Joan, and she knew a lot about the story. She was not a spy. He married her he met her after the war when he was doing his doctorate at the University of Chicago. And he married her a year after he met her when she was still, I think she just turned 18 when he married her, and he was 21. They lived for 50 years expecting him to be arrested at some point, but he never was. And the reason I found out, and it's explained in the book, that when Herbert Hoover found out about him, J. Edgar Hoover learned about him from the NSA precursor, which was called the SIS, Signal Intelligence Service of the Army. They had succeeded finally in 1949 to start to crack the code that was used, very complicated code, pre-computer code that the Soviet spy agency was using to communicate with Lubyanka in Moscow from the consulate in New York City, where they were headquartered. And they finally started to crack it in 1949. The first thing they cracked was a list of top scientists working at Los Alamos, which had been provided by Ted to present his bona fides that he really was capable of being a spy and that the information he had was real. And the second thing they translated was a cable that said an 18-year-old scientist from Los Alamos has come in to me. This is a guy he was told to go look for in New York, who says he works on the super weapon in Los Alamos, and he wants you to know about it. And they said his name was Theodore Cole. It was almost Cole. It was spelled wrong. And his father is a Jewish Russian immigrant furrier. And that was the giveaway, because that was his dad. And anyway, Hoover found out in January of 1950, and he set out an all bureau-wide search then for finding out where Ted Hall was, because he had left Los Alamos in '46 when it was shut down, the program, and taken over by the Atomic Energy Commission. So they found him pretty quickly in the University of Chicago. They also found out that his brother was working as a major in the Air Force. He had been here in in the UK all during the war repairing bombers, B-17s, so that when they came in all shattered and broken and limped across the channel, he could get them fixed so they could turn around really fast and go back to doing more bombing. And then he went to Caltech after the war while he was still in the military and got a aeronautical engineering degree. And then by 1950, he was working in a secret weapons lab at Wright-Patterson Air Base in Ohio near Dayton, where he was working on building motors for the a new concept, ICBM missiles to carry atomic bombs all the way to the Soviet Union. And so he was working on that, and he was heading up the project for the Air Force. So the Air Force was notified in 1951, in January, by Hoover, that there was the brother of their rocket scientist was a known atomic spy. And he said, I'm just telling you that. We would like to interview his brother. And the Air Force said no, initially. And they said, we will do it. We'll investigate him and see whether he's a threat to American interests. And so they investigated, and they decided that eventually that the Air Force could, that the Hoover could have FBI agents and question him about his brother, but only about his brother, not about himself, and that OSI, Office of Special Investigations of the Air Force, would be in on the interview to make sure that they didn't transgress that rule. And so the interviews happened. After they happened, I have the FBI file that shows that Hoover learned that 2 weeks after that interview, Ed Hall was promoted from major to lieutenant colonel, and later to colonel, and put in charge of the rocket development process. He invented the motor and oversaw the development of the motor for the Atlas missile, first ICBM, the Titan, and then he developed the whole concept of an ICBM that was solid fuel, the Minuteman, and oversaw the completion of that project and installation of the first Minuteman missiles in silos to give instant firing of rockets instead of waiting until you could fuel them. So the brother was too important to be allowed to be arrested, because they said, you know, if he was arrested, it would be very quickly known in the McCarthy era, this would have been, that his brother was an atomic spy who gave the Russians the bomb. And he would have lost his security clearance, and the Air Force would have lost their top ICBM scientist, engineer. So Ted was insulated. He wasn't caught, but he didn't know, because they couldn't, they told Hoover, no leaks. Who's a famous leaker, no leaks, you can't say anything about this, nobody can know, Ed can't know that that we've, you know, approved him, and Ted can't know anything about this. So for all those years, Ted left in 1962 to get away from the Red Scare, because he was always worried he'd get arrested, so he brought his family here. He got invited by Vernon Coslet, who was a major biophysicist and invented the electron microscope at Cavendish, and he invited Ted to come and work with him. And Ted had changed his field so that he wouldn't attract attention. He wanted to be a particle physicist, but he thought that was a bad idea. So he switched his major for his physics doctorate to biophysics. So that's kind of the basic story. Now, what I did in the book was I looked at the question of what did Ted Hall accomplish? And I do want to tell you one thing that is fascinating about the story. You might wonder, how did Ted find a spy? I mean, think about it. Spies don't put out want ads and say looking for, you know, a spy in the Manhattan Project. And they don't say, this is my address, please come here if you're interested in a job for the NKVD. This is the precursor to the KGB. How do you do it? And Ted decided, to go to New York, meet he got a leave in October of 1944 for his birthday, so he could go home to New York and celebrate it with his family, his 19th birthday. And so he made an arrangement for his Harvard roommate to come from Cambridge and meet him in New York. They both were New Yorkers, so they knew their way around New York. And to meet him, and then they would figure out how to contact the Soviet Union. So when they met, they went out in a pond in Central Park, so they'd be not able to be overheard by anybody, and rowed out into the middle of the pond, and they discussed it. And Ted said, well, I'll just go to the consulate. And Sally Sachs said, you can't do that. They've got your picture from your ID picture, and you can be sure that the U.S. is monitoring the consulate all the time, who comes and goes from outside it, and so you'll be caught. So let me go. They're not going to be monitoring me. I'm just a Harvard student, and I'm not involved with the Manhattan Project, and I will go there and I'll tell them that I know a guy from the Manhattan Project who wants to tell you about a super weapon that you need to know about. So that was the plan. And meanwhile, Ted thought, well, I'll go to Amtorg, which was the trading company for the Soviet Union during the war. Remember, Soviet Union was America's main ally in World War II in terms of the impact. The U.S. was supplying enormous amounts of aid, especially trucks, some tanks, fighter planes to knock down German bombers, and all these things. They built the whole Alaskan highway so that they could ship, fuel along it to stopping points so that the planes they were shipping over could fly and could hop over into Alaska and then go across the Bering Strait, get put on trains or keep hopping to get to the Eastern Front. And they were really important in stopping Soviet bombing, German bombing of Soviet targets. So anyway, Ted thought he'd go to Amtorg, which is a trading company, and he naively thought, those will be business guys, and they'll know people in the consulate. If I go to one of them, they'll tell them that I need to talk to somebody, or they'll take the stuff I'm bringing, the list of names of scientists and stuff, whatever. So he went there, and he went up the freight elevator, and he got out at this one floor that said Amtorg in the garment district, this was, in New York. And he saw a guy stacking boxes, and the guy said to him with a New York accent, what do you want? And he said, well, he just said the first thing he thought he could come up with, which was, I'm a scientist. This is the kid, the 19-year-old kid. So I'm a scientist out in New Mexico on a secret project building a super weapon that the Soviet Union needs to know about it. And who can I talk to? And he said the guy looked really nervous and said, well, there's nobody here who can help you with that. But you could go to a guy named Sergei Kurnikov, who's a Russian emigrated journalist, and he knows everybody Russian in New York, and he might be able to steer you somewhere. Well, actually, Sergei Kurnikov he was a white Russian former cavalry officer for the Tsar, who fought with the white Russians in the Civil War, for the old regime against the Bolsheviks. And he came to America after the Civil War was lost by them, and got, he got admitted to the U.S. and worked as a journalist. His English was good. And then he gradually came over to the other side and thought that what was happening in Russia was good, and eventually became a spy recruiter. And his job was sort of to sound them out before, since he didn't seem to be a spy, to sound them out and see whether they were for real. So he wound up with just the right guy. And when he went to see him, he said, Kurnikov said to him, well, why? Well, first of all, how do I know you're really involved in a project? And he says, well, here's a list of the scientists who are in this project. And the guy looked at it. His father was a scientist, by the way, Kurnikov. And so he knew enough to know that these were like, Niels Bohr, Oppenheimer, these were big names in physics. And he knew that if there's that many, it was a long list, he said, this is something really serious. And so, and then he said, well, why would you want to be a traitor to your own country? And Ted said, I'm not. He said, I'm only concerned that this weapon is so powerful it should not be in the hands of one country. And I think that the Soviet Union is the only country that makes sense to give it to. So that's what I want to do. And he said, well, what do you have? What information do you have? And he said, as a kid. And he said, I can show you how the plutonium bomb works. And he said, I've drawn how it works and explained it. Give this to any physicist in Russia, and he's going to know that this is for real. And so that's what he did. Now, he said, I'm in a hurry to get back. I only have 2 weeks leave, and that's in 2 more days. And I need to know how you want to get in touch with me, because it's completely shut down out there. You can't, there's no phones you can use. There's only 2 phones at Los Alamos, and they're heavily guarded and monitored. The mail is monitored in and out. So unless there's some way you can reach me or I can reach you, there's no way for us to get back in touch once I get on the train back. And so they made a huge decision. The local office in the consulate, in charge of the NKVD, made the decision to not wait for permission from Beria in the headquarters in Lubyanka, but to go ahead and say Ted could be a spy, which is a pretty bold thing to do when you consider who Beria was. And he didn't take kindly to people who didn't obey orders or who goofed up. So they usually got taken to the basement in Lubyanka and shot in the head. So they made the decision. They sent the information by pouch, which had to go over the Alaskan highway to get to Russia, which took days and days. And Ted went to the train with his father and his stepmother to say goodbye to him in Penn Station. And he went and was talking with them and thinking that he had failed. But there was Kurnikov across the hall waving to him. And he went, what? And so he walked over and didn't say anything to his parents. And Kurnikov told him, you're in. And your roommate is going to be your courier. And so that's the news Ted got. And they continued to be in touch with Sybil Sachs and got him to go out to Albuquerque and communicate with Ted. And so it was all set up. Amazingly, he wasn't punished for making that judgment. So, because they actually were desperate to have somebody inside Los Alamos, Lubyanka, they didn't have anybody. So Ted walked in at the exactly right time, or he never would have been offered the opportunity. He did not want money. He did not get money. He just wanted to give them the information. And ultimately, he gave them, right between the time of the 2 bombs dropped on Japan And the actual surrender on the 12th of August, Ted had his meeting with a professional courier named Cohen, and Alona Cohen, who went out specially and met him in Albuquerque, and he gave her about 30 pages of details about how to make the bomb, including a full schematic of the bomb. She put it on the bottom of her Kleenex box because she had gone out there on the pretense that her doctor said she had bad asthma and she needed to be in the desert for a while and recuperating. And so it's a great story. When she went to go to the train, the bombs had gone off, the war was over, and there were security people all over the train station, because at that point, the US was going, oh my God, we have to really seal this off. And worrying about the Soviets now, because Germany was over. And so she thought, how am I going to get on? And she thought about using the Kleenex box. So she first went to the hotel and she put her ticket in her suitcase under the side by her clothes. And when she went back, they said, okay, open your suitcase. Or where did you? She said, oh, I can't find my ticket. She's looking for her ticket in her purse and everything. And this would make a great film scene. She's acting really scattered, and frantic, because it's getting close to the time of the train to leave. And she's holding the Kleenex under her arm and digging around, and she said, I don't know where it is. And she is looking in her suitcase, and she says, here, hold this. And she gave to the security guy, she gave her Kleenex box. So he's holding all this stuff. And she then dug around and found her ticket, because she knew where it was. And she said, oh, thanks. And then she did the really coolest thing. She didn't ask for the Kleenex box back. She went straight to the train car, because it was, they were getting ready they were saying all aboard. And she got on, and the guy said, wait, miss, your Kleenexes. And the security guard ran over and handed it to her. And so that's how she got away with this thing. And now, apparently, when she finally wound up, she got caught later in England when her husband and she were hiding out as spies, taking the job of an old used bookstore near Ramsden Airport. And she got caught, and after she got let out by the Queen of England, when she let a bunch of people go on her coronation, and they got to go back to Russia, and she became a trainer for spies at Lubyanka, and that was a story that everybody wanted to hear all the time. It's famous, apparently, in the KGB, that kind of decision to take a big chance. But anyway, so that's how it happened. And so now what I want to say is, because we're getting close to the end, the importance of this story is that if Ted had not done that, and the reason the book chapter says, I didn't advance this very well. The reason that that's Abby Sachs. That's Joan Hall when she met Ted, and that's her when she was 93. She died at 93. That's Ted when he was 71. There's the two bombs. The bomb that was exploded in Nagasaki was a carbon copy of the Nagasaki bomb because of what Ted gave the Russians. They exploded it on the 29th of August, 1949. The importance of that date is that, and this is what nobody knows, and what I exposed in the book. As soon as the Trinity test succeeded, and the US knew they had an atomic bomb. Truman asked the Manhattan Project, which was going to be folded once the war ended and turned into the Atomic Energy Commission. He told them, told Oppenheimer, I want you to start working on how to industrialize production of the atomic bomb, because these bombs were made by hand. And they only had two at the time that they bombed Japan. The third one wasn't ready until December of 1945. And the next year, they only had 9 at the end of the year, because it's very hard to industrialize it. And so I think most of the 9 were uranium bombs, which were much simpler to make. And they were starting to figure out how to get the uranium-235 isolated out. So at any rate, they they finally got to the point where by August of 1949, they only had 230 bombs, but the strategists at the Pentagon had told Truman, in response to a question he sent them, that it would take 400 atomic bombs to destroy Russia as an industrial society. That was the term they used. That was his question. 400. And he had to have bombers enough to carry the 400 bombs, because a B-29 was the only plane they had that could fly a long distance carrying one of these bombs. So that meant they needed 400 B-29s. They had to restart the assembly line for that. And by 1950, they weren't going to have 400 bombs yet. And the Russians blew off their bomb on August 29th. And Truman had to cancel the plans for attacking Russia with 400 bombs. And those 400 bombs had to hit 100 targets. And some of them with multiple bombs. They wanted to hit Moscow with 4, and Leningrad, and other larger cities and industrial centers were being hit by 1 or 2. I mean, these weren't huge bombs, but they were pretty big. And so that was the plan. He also instructed them to start work before the war ended on the hydrogen bomb, because now that they had an atomic bomb, they could make a hydrogen bomb go off. So that was the next project. And all of this was aimed at the Soviet Union. This was the mind blower for me, because they really did build hundreds and then thousands of bombs before the Soviets even had, a handful after their first bomb. And the plan was to hit the Soviet Union in a preemptive attack, which they referred to as transcendental, if they could do it first. Transcendental. And so that's what didn't happen. That's the frightening thought. And by the way, as that plan developed, the names changed. The first names were things like Sizzler, Broiler, horrible names. And finally they settled on Drop Shot after the iterations were, as they got more and more bombs, they added targets and changed the names. And so, I'm sorry. There's the plan. There's the brothers. There's the first plan. This shows the plans coming in all over from different directions. And ultimately, by the late 50s, they were targeting not just the Soviet Union, but Beijing, because by then China was communist, and they were going to, even though if they went to war against Russia, they were going to bomb China, North Korea, Hanoi, and the major cities of the Eastern Bloc countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact. They even included, in the list I saw in the National Archives, the plan included bombing East Berlin. And I thought, how the hell are they going to bomb East Berlin without bombing West Berlin? I mean, these guys were like really insane. So this is what didn't happen, and here's, I don't know if you can see that. This is the strategic plan. They were going to drop atomic bombs on target in 30-day period, 180 bombs aimed at the industrial system, at 141 more on electric power and steel, 109 on petroleum and electric. And they don't even mention the fact that they were going to hit like 80 or so cities, and then this pathetic amount of conventional bombs. So this is what was planned to be done, and didn't happen. So we certainly had a lot of scary times. I remember them. I'm 75. I remember my dad taking us to see a septic tank and oil tank distributor outside the University of Connecticut, who had entrepreneurially, when things got really scary just before the Cuban Missile Crisis, to turn them into bomb shelters. Put a conning tower on it that would stick out of the ground, an air pipe with a filter, and a bicycle welded to the floor so you could pump electricity and pump a fan. And my dad is an electrical engineer and a pretty brilliant guy. I remember I was like 11 or something, and 13 or something, and my dad climbed up a ladder and went down into this conning tower and disappeared to look at it. And he came out shaking his head, and like that, and came down the ladder, and he walked over to my mother and said, "Daddy, I would rather die of radiation than spend 3 months trapped inside that thing with 3 squabbling kids." and I remember thinking, oh my God, these better be better behaved, or we're not going to be protected. But that was my problem. But that's what the times were like. And that was also because of Ted. It wasn't his intent, apparently. I mean, Jones said he never even conceived of the idea of a mutually assured destruction and a arms race that would cost trillions of dollars. He thought it would be like what happened to chemical weapons after World War I. It took a while, but they realized the horror of the both sides gassing each other. My grandfather was going to be in the Olympics before World War I started, and after that he was a coach because his lungs were completely destroyed in the trenches. And a lot of people suffered that if they didn't kill them. And so they banned chemical weapons eventually because they realized, what's the point? They're killing each other and you didn't gain anything. Well, that's true of nuclear weapons too. And so Ted assumed, and I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption, that that's what would happen if they both had the bomb and you can't use the bomb. So why do we have them? But they didn't do that. They did this stupid stuff of the U.S. trying to always be ahead and the Russians always trying desperately to keep up, which is still happening. So now we're modernizing our bombs. So I think it's an important story even today, not just historically.
That's an amazing story. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.